and it is already against the law to phone or to text while you're driving. But the government wants to tighten this up further to stop drivers from using their phones to film or search playlists or whatever. So from next year, drivers who break the new rules will be fined £200 and get 6 points on their licence. Nick Freeman is an author, commentator and criminal defence lawyer known as Mr. Loophole. Morning, Mr. Loophole.
Good morning, Rick. Good morning, Rachel.
So can you explain how the current law works, first of all, please?
Yeah, for the current law, the actual offence is using a handheld mobile phone for an interactive purpose. So it's a very narrow area of confinement. So basically, when this legislation was brought in 2003, most phones weren't very sophisticated then, and most people used them simply to make calls, receive calls, or to send text. So it didn't actually occur to anyone that there would need to be amendment to accommodate the further use. And of course, we now use our mobile phones literally as our lives. And so what happens now is if somebody is charged with using a handheld mobile phone, the Crown have to prove it's for an interactive purpose. And if it's not for an interactive purpose, it doesn't offend this particular legislation.
So searching for music would be fine?
Well, it depends if you're using the internet or not. It depends how you do it.
Right.
So, and of course, you don't have to defend the case as a defendant. The Crown have to prove it. So there is a huge problem that the legislation was always quite cumbersome. It just needs refining. And if you think about it, just picking up a phone and using it for any purpose, even looking at your clock on the phone, if you want to, there was the famous case in 2009 when a well-known comedian, Jimmy Carr, recorded a joke. That didn't offend the legislation because it wasn't an interactive purpose. But the mischief which Parliament is trying to rectify is basically don't use your phone while driving because it's dangerous.
And so will this new legislation actually clarify it then?
Well, it will outlaw or prohibit all use of mobile phones for whatever purpose whilst driving. That is fine by itself, but there's a huge problem, and the problem is there are no police to enforce it. And so they need to do that, in my opinion. That's one thing. And what they also need to do is to increase the penalty, and this might be surprising for a defence lawyer to say, but the level of distraction when you're using a mobile phone is exactly the same as drink driving. And it does seem bizarre that when you're disqualified for drink driving, it's a minimum period of 12 months. When you're using your mobile phone and the level of distraction is exactly the same, it's exactly as dangerous as drink driving, you get 6 points and you're talking about a £200 fine. If you give the penalty some teeth, then that might in some way compensate for the lack of police on our roads. And it might be a penalty that polices itself. Because I think if people think, goodness me, if someone sees me and there are all these vigilante cyclists about, etc., someone might not be inclined to take the risk if they're facing a 12-month ban, bearing in mind all they need to do is touch the phone whilst in use. That's all they need to do under this proposed new legislation. And one of the reasons the legislation is being changed is because drivers have such a relaxed attitude now to using their mobile phones. And in addition, it's such a confined area of use that the job is very difficult for the Crown and the police to actually prove their case now. So it's welcome legislation, but it's insufficient by itself. Because unless you have police on the road or a means of enforcement, it just doesn't work, does it? People won't be deterred because they're not going to get caught. That's the reality.
We were speaking earlier about whether using that touch screen that you get on so many newer cars now in the centre of the console is actually just as distracting because there's so much stuff on there.
Yeah. And my answer is absolutely, it is just as distracting. And I think it's important for all your listeners to bear in mind that if you're using your sat-nav or if you're using your mobile phone on hands-free, so you think you're using it legal and God forbid you're involved in an accident because you're distracted, and if it's a serious accident, the fact that you were on the face of it using it legally won't in any way prevent the authorities from charging you with dangerous driving or even worse. So people have this sort of false area of comfort. Oh, I'm using my mobile phone. I'm using it legally, or I'm using my sat-nav. The law doesn't prohibit me. The law requires you to pay attention all the time. And if you are distracted and there are serious consequences from that distraction, you'll face the full letter of the law, and it won't help you to say, oh, I thought I could do that. And people don't realize that. So the law in many respects is misleading, and you're absolutely right. The modern cars, the technology in these modern cars is a massive level of distraction, particularly as they're not that intuitive, they're counterintuitive, and many people, particularly of a certain age, struggle to make them work.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I am of a certain age, and I struggle to make mine work. Thanks very much for talking to us this morning. Nick Freeman there, author, commentator, and criminal defence lawyer.